Hello and welcome to the Civic Space Dialogue, a program brought to you by National Association of Youth Organizations, right here on Zimbabwe Daily. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching us from YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, just send a like and also share our page. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having us today.
Awesome. I will ask you guys to introduce yourself so that our people are aware who we are talking to.
All right, a pleasant afternoon to you all. My name is McDonald Munyoro. I work with the National Association of Youth Organizations, Nayo, where I'm the males manager. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tapiwa.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. My name is Tapiwanashe Chiriga, and I'm a former student leader, a former Secretary General of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, and I'm currently working with Youth Zimbabwe Trust.
Awesome. So this is the Civic Space Dialogue. And we want to understand what is civic space. Do people understand when we say civic space? Do you know what we're talking about? You can give us that introduction.
All right, thank you very much, Yvonne. So civic space is a concept that relates to the exercise of freedoms of assembly, association, and expression. Civic space has to do with universally accepted and recognized human rights that form the basis of the existence of humanity. As an example, through expression, you'd find that citizens and individuals can freely express themselves on any subject matter. These are rights which are provided for within the Universal Declaration of Rights, and even at a regional level, at a national level, you'd also find that through constitutions, through regional conventions and protocols, these rights are also provided for. But I think coming back to your question and answering what civic space is, here we're looking at the political, social, economic space that is opened or available in a country. Right. For non-state actors, this could be civil society organizations, it could be social movements, it could be community-based organizations, it could even be citizens, for them to freely express themselves. Right. And the idea of the expression is towards influencing. It could be government policies, government programs. And we're also talking about civic space. It is also very important for us to know that it's the space that exists outside of government and business, which is why, for instance, you can see trade unions, staging actions to try and influence business in terms of how it could be paying workers, how it could be treating workers, as an example, or the same happening in the context of government. So civic space, in essence, is the space that is then created within a country that allows for these non-state actors to function and also to thrive. And a concept that is also closely attached to the concept of civic space is civil society enabling environment, which is basically the kind of context and policies that are created both by government, development partners, and other actors in development that affect the way that civil society organizations do their work in a particular country.
Right. And maybe, Tapiwa, you can help us to put this into context. What is our space here in Zimbabwe like?
Our space, which I can confidently say that it is sadly shrinking and it is about to be closed. It is a space where, in our context, it has been abused by state actors. It has been infiltrated by state actors. The state has demonstrated a serious interest in as far as closing civic space is concerned. The state has demonstrated a clear interest in making sure that they close every avenue through which citizens can express themselves. The state has made sure that they have to repress anyone who seeks to speak out. They have expressed a desire to make sure that anyone who does not sing according to their tune should be silenced. So we are a generation whose mouths have been closed, or at least if they've tried to close our mouths. In as much as we are wearing those masks against COVID-19, we equally have a very huge and probably metallic mask on our mouths so that we cannot speak, we cannot act, and we cannot effectively hold all duty bearers to account.
Right. Thank you so much, Tapiwa. You raised some very interesting points there. And I'm going to come back to you, McDonald, and say he has mentioned that government is moving in to shrink that space and making it difficult for civic players to actually, be able to do their part, call out on issues that needs to be raised, etc. Now, what kind of policies, if we're just to look at our Zimbabwean landscape, would you say are some of those that are shrinking or reducing and disabling that civic space?
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I think let me just, before coming to the question, just speak to the issue that you mentioned concerning the role of civil society organizations. So you'd find that in any community, in any country, we have these non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations, or however you choose to call them in your own particular context. And they are there to complement the work of the government. For instance, in Zimbabwe, we have
Are you really there to complement the work of the government?
Yes, we are there to complement the work of government.
How?
Because remember, if we look at Zimbabwe with the National Development Strategy,
Right.
NDS1, it means that whatever we are doing, the government has set the development plan for the country. We come in to complement the efforts and the programs of government.
Right.
So as civil society organizations, whilst you are independent development actors, just like what the development partners do when they finance development in our countries, they hinge that and they base that on the prevailing national development strategy or plan for that country. So as civil society organizations, we are there to complement the work of the government. But I think going back to what Chiriga was saying, if we look at the context in Zimbabwe, it is as if non-governmental organizations are pursuing agendas that are contrary to those that are set as part of national development priorities.
As seen by who? By the government?
I mean, you can hear in media, you can read in newspapers, NGOs are looked as if they are regime change agents, as if they are working for the West. Yet, we are there as development actors. If you look at most of the organizations that we find in Zimbabwe, they are indigenous and they are homegrown.
Right.
They are trying to speak and transform the lived realities of our young people. If you look at myself, I've worked extensively in the youth sector. It has all and has been about trying to improve the lives of young people in our country. Right. But then I think you raised a very important question to then say, so policy-wise, what is happening in Zimbabwe?
Right.
And I think in Zimbabwe, we are at a time where the policy space has been shrinking in terms of civic space. I'll give a very good example. I think towards the end of last year, the government gazetted the Private Voluntary Organizations PVO Amendment Bill, which is trying to make a series of amendments to the PVO Act, which is the main regulatory framework for civil society organizations in our country. And some of those measures, if you are to read in and look closely into them, they are going to make the operations of CSOs very difficult in our country. It's going to make it very difficult for you to even operate and be registered. Because previously organizations could operate by virtue of their constitutions as universities, by virtue of being registered as a trust deed, or by virtue of being registered under the PVO Act, which over time has been cumbersome, red tape, bureaucracy, and all of those things. And you can imagine when we say that everyone now needs to fall under one form of registration, it's going to mean that a lot of organizations are going to be deregistered, number one.
Right.
They are going to lose contact with their communities. And if you look at Zimbabwe, we are living in a country where unemployment is high, where poverty is high. And some of these interventions from civil society organizations are helping our citizens who are at critical points in terms of accessing food aid, in terms of getting livelihood support, in terms of trying to build their capacities in such ways that they can begin to engage their leaders and begin at a local level to transform service delivery, to transform even how policies are made in such a way that they can be pro-poor and drive most of our citizens who are in poverty out of poverty. So I would say that when you look at the policy context, the kind of shifts that we've had, especially in 2021, they point, like what Chiriga was saying, to shrinking civic space. And moving forward, it's going to be very worrisome, especially with the prospects of the 2023 elections, which are now coming, And if you are to go into any community or any public place, you can actually feel as if Zimbabwe is going for elections in the next 6 months.
Right.
But we still have a year and another 6 months to go before we can even have an election. So it says a lot about how the context is shifting and how difficult it is now for civil society organizations and actors to access communities.
Right. So you're tuned into Zimbabwe Daily. This is a live broadcast coming to you courtesy of the National Association of Youth Organization, the Civil Space Dialogue. All right. I'm going to come back to you again, McDonald. And, numbers, and generally sometimes we really don't like numbers. But in this case, I'm going to have to ask, because when we talk about civic space shrinking in Zimbabwe, what are we talking about in terms of percentage? In terms of rating, even across Africa and even world over, where are we playing as Zimbabwe?
All right, so thank you very much. We have what is called the Civicus Monitor. It's a global tool that has been developed by the Civicus Alliance. It's one of the many tools that is used to measure civic space across the world. And it's also one of the globally space, which is why in this particular instance, I'll give reference to it. What the Civicus Monitor does is that it ranks countries across 5 parameters, which start from being open to being closed.
Right.
In between, we have what they call narrow, we have what they call repressed, we also have what they call, I'm forgetting the other one, but you should find that there are 5 parameters across which countries are then ranked. And if we look at the Civicus ratings for 2021,
right,
even now 2022, you'd find that Zimbabwe is ranked as being in the repressed category. And repressed category, what that means is you are just one more step from that space from being closed. So that the bottom. And that says a lot about the kind of conditions under which civil society organizations and citizens live under. For instance, if the context is said to be repressed, it means that there are laws and sets of administrative practice that make it very difficult for civil society organizations to organize, to operate. And when we're saying difficulties in organizing and operating, it might mean that, for instance, if you want to do a community meeting, you might need to seek clearance or approval from some authority or institution within government. It also means that human rights defenders cannot freely organize and undertake their work. In most cases, they could be arrested, they could be intimidated. So you'd find that when the environment is considered to be repressed, we all must be concerned, we all must be worried. Because I mean, look at this analogy. In a normal family where you've got a father, a mother, and their children, ideally, any child within the family should be able to express their opinion.
Right.
I do not feel like I want to eat porridge this morning. Can I skip porridge and have tea?
Right.
But imagine a scenario where it's the same setup. A child wakes up and he says, okay, my tummy, I feel like I should not eat porridge, I should have tea. And then they're beaten. And then they're intimidated. And then they are targeted. And then they're assaulted. It then says that there is something wrong in terms of how we are relating each other at a social level. Because when the context is repressed, it even means that as civil society organizations, we cannot come together and pursue our shared interests.
Right.
Others are concerned about issues of sexual reproductive health rights. Others, they're concerned about issues of gender. Others about climate change. Others about water. We should all be able to come together, sit around a table like this, organize a community, lodge a petition, do a march, and get the attention of a minister, of a mayor, of a councillor, or any local leader.
Right.
But when the environment is said to be repressed, it means that even some of those basic forms of organizing, expressing yourself, and trying to get attention to issues, you might not actually have enough space to do all of that. So like I said before, we must be concerned, we must be worried, we must do our things in such a way that progressively we move towards an open society in terms of civic space in Zimbabwe.
Right, before you rest, McDonald, I remember sometime last year, Tafaz Bamguti issuing this letter and saying, organizations must bring in their work plans and stuff like that. Now, when that happens, what does that mean? I mean, those of us who may be operating outside of civic society may not understand why there was resistance in some quarters and yet some complied. What implications does such a directive have on how civic societies operate?
All right. So, like you're saying, last year we had the provincial coordinator, I think, for Harare province and Masvingo province, issuing directives to non-governmental organizations to say that they were supposed to submit their work plans and comply in certain ways with the office of the provincial coordinator.
Right.
To start off with, within the laws of Zimbabwe, there is no way that we hear of a provincial development coordinator to start off with. These are laws that need to come into place that have not even come into place. So we should not even be giving reference to to such a person, to such a responsibility.
Right.
Organizations in Zimbabwe are registered through the PVO Act, the Register of Deeds, and through the Universitas route. And all of these pathways provide for an authority to whom these organizations can report to in terms of their plans, in terms of their work, in terms of what they're doing.
Right.
So from that point of view, you would find that such an administrative directive points to shrinking civic space within the country. Why should we want to snoop into so much about what organizations are doing? Ultimately, at some point, they're going to report. Right. It could be to their board, to the PVO board, it could be to a particular ministry that they're partnering with that is within the government. So I think when we have such directives, it is worrying and it points to shrinking civic space within the country. And I think when civil society organizations heard this, there was a lot of commotion, there was a lot of chaos, confusion. Right. To then say, do we comply? Do we not comply? What will it mean if we comply? And I think we must, give a thumbs up to the Apex organizations that came together and lodged a High Court application trying to stop that directive. And justice prevailed in the sense that the High Court overruled or overturned those directives. Why? Because civil society organizations should be allowed to operate and undertake their work already through MOUs with different local authorities, line ministries, and all of that. There is a lot of reporting that is going on. And trying to add this was also trying to create another extra layer of work, another extra layer of regulation, and another layer in terms of compliance when it comes to the work of non-governmental organizations. At the heart of what these NGOs are doing is work to reduce poverty. Right. It's work to empower our citizens. Let us allow them, let us give them space under the different pathways that are allowed for and recognized at law within the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much, McDonald. Now over to you, Tapiwa. We are now in 2022. We've got by-elections looming. We've got a lot of things happening right now. Like what McDonald said earlier on, that it's as if we've got an impending election in the next 6 months. The mode and the mood that is within this country. Now, when we talk of shrinking civic space and student activism, what does that look like?
Firstly, maybe I would want to allude first to what you asked about a certain individual, a private individual. We recognize him as such, Mr. Tafadzo Mubuti. I'm one of the people who responded to him. I gave him the courtesy because he is a fellow citizen of Zimbabwe and nothing much more in as far as the affairs of this country are at. As much as he would want to call himself the Prime Minister of Harare or something else, I responded to him. Many other organizations responded to him. But it was a microcosm of the macrocosm, right, of how the state wants to continuously poke its nose in the affairs of non-state actors, of how the state now wants to hold NGOs to account when it should be the other way around. We who are in the civic society organizations should be holding the state to account because they're using our money. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, in as far as the thinking civic space is concerned, I am an example of one of the many people who became a guest of the state for a number of weeks simply for holding a press conference.
Right.
Speaking to the media like I'm doing now, he had me ending up in prison cells for 2 weeks. That is how vindictive, that is how petty the state has become in as far as making sure that they close every mouth that seeks to speak.
Right.
We have had General Council, when I was Secretary General last year in December, we had our General Council disrupted by riot police officers after we had refused to grant members of the President's office access to our meeting because they wanted to listen to what we were discussing, which was an internal matter.
Right.
So that is how the state wants to impose itself on us. That is how the state, because of the lack of a social contract between the citizens and the state, it now wants to redraft its own version of a contract where it suddenly becomes a general overseer of the affairs of the people. And if we let the state to continuously poke its noses into our affairs, who knows, maybe tomorrow they will start dictating what we should eat for supper.
Right.
And you see, you realize that in 2021, more than 60 people were arrested for petty reasons in as far as speaking up was concerned. But the more worrying trend that we've seen across Africa and even in Zimbabwe in particular was the weaponization of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as far as we saw, we were supposed to stay at home and everything. Those draconian statutory instruments that were meant to confine us at home were now being abused to completely close political space, to completely shut down democratic space and shrink civic space. Now, right now, you can see that you have certain people whom I will not name, moving around, mobilizing young people for the ruling party and other political actors. But the moment a civil society organization or an opposite political party seeks to have a meeting of 50 people, they are told that there is a COVID-19 pandemic you cannot meet. Then you realize there's no justice in it all, but just the weaponization of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has now been used to close, shut down, and shrink civic, political, and democratic space.
Right. You talk about how the civic space has shrunk and how COVID-19 has had that contributing factor. You also spoke about arrests, and you spoke about how state actors want to be part of the non-state actors dialogue space. What other violations have we witnessed in 2021 likely to carry themselves over into 2022, and what advice would you give, or what would you say to government right now concerning that?
Okay, thank you. We've seen the demolition of vending stores for vendors. We have seen citizens being randomly beaten up in the CBD, ostensibly under the impression that they would have violated curfew when there is a transport crisis in Nayo. We have seen people being beaten at demonstrations. We've seen people being followed to their homes. I myself have been followed in 2021 a number of times for many other reasons.
Right.
So we have seen people, we've seen livelihoods destroyed. We have seen people like Makombora Roziwishe spending 10 months and 22 days in prison for speaking out. We have seen members of the Zimbabwe National Students Union, where I was a member up until there was a transfer of authority, getting beaten, arrested, tortured, abducted. We've seen abductions in the middle of the night, and you can't make follow-ups because you are supposed to be confined at home. So that is how the COVID-19 pandemic has been weaponized. Right. But my word to the government continues to be the same. This is 42 years after independence. Right. We cannot continue asking for freedom. We cannot continue demanding for freedom. We are claiming our democratic, political, and civic space. Why do we do that? Because it is not something that is novel to Zimbabwe. It is not something that is new to Zimbabwe. Right. It is not something that we are copying from any other country. It is what is in the constitution, which was voted in by more than 96% of the population. So we are going to follow the constitution as citizens and make sure that we claim our own civic space, we claim our democratic space, we claim our political space as young people, as progressive citizens, and make sure that we no longer have to ask as if it is a favor from government, because it is not a favor from government for us to exercise our rights. These are our rights. These are given to us by virtue of us being human, by virtue of us being Zimbabwean, and we are going to exercise them as per the dictates of the constitution.
Awesome. Spoken passionately. Know your constitution, know your rights, know when, where, how, and why you should be participating in these non-state actor spaces. And I am talking to Tapiwanashe Chiriga, a former student leader and also coming in from Civic Society. We also have McDonald coming through from the National Association of Youth Organization. Now, McDonald, just as we wrap up this conversation, why do you feel that this civic space dialogue is important, and why, as Nayo, are you bringing it on board?
All right, so it becomes problematic in any context and any country when civic space begins to shrink, because in essence it means that there are serious issues of rights violation. It means that citizens cannot be able to express themselves. It also means that the nature and the quality of service delivery loses the human side to it, because it is through civic space, for instance, that citizens can lodge complaints, can express their dissent, can engage their local elected leaders. So through these dialogues, what we are hoping to do is to take into the homes and lives of people the concept of civic space. Because when we're talking about defending civic space, it is as if we are doing something which is foreign to our own lived realities. What we're simply saying is, let's begin to come together and defend the freedoms to association. And when we're talking about association, we're talking about the rights that we have as citizens to form our groups, to pursue shared interests, to come together over a public concern and organize ourselves around that. We are talking about the freedom of peaceful assembly, where we are saying that for whatever issue that we feel we need to come together and express ourselves, it could be in a march, in a demonstration, in a walk, we should be able to do some of those things as citizens, because over time and over history, some of these rights were never there, but they are now provided for, and they are there for us to exercise them. So let's begin to demystify, some of the stereotyping that goes to organizing and to toying, because in essence, at the heart of all of that, citizens are trying to express critical issues that could help policy, that could help government programs, and that could also help humanity within that particular country context. And of course, and most importantly, we are also talking about the need for